The Drum Candy podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
Welcome into episode 17 of the Drum Candy podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, and I'm coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This week, I'm sitting down with my good friend, Chris Carr. Chris is the master craftsman at Bucks County Drums. He designs and builds and makes his own drum shells. He's one of the few custom companies I'm aware of that makes their own shells, especially plywood shells. Many years of experience as a carpenter and a drummer and a builder. I own a bunch of his drums. I bought a few kits and snares over the years. Some of the finest made drums that I've ever played. So this is a deep dive. We go super nerd right away. We're talking about everything that makes a drum sound like a drum and all of Chris' philosophies on, which species sound certain ways. And we talk about bearing edges and, ply thicknesses and Rerings and hoops. So if you have any questions about the anatomy of a drum, this is the episode for you. So let's get to it. Chris Carr of Bucks County Drums. What's the last thing you built?
The last thing I built was this kit behind me.
What is it?
It's a 8-ply cherry kit. Whenever I have downtime, I like to try to experiment with new ideas. I might have 5 minutes here or there, so I'm like, I'm going to start gluing this up. And I do that. So in between builds. So this kit is 8-ply cherry, no Rerings. And it's what I would call a special edition Prime Series kit. 8-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, 15-inch, and a 22-inch. And it was really important for me. I wanted to know, if you recall the 6-ply cherry kit you reviewed, I guess 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I think it had Rerings. Mm-hmm. So I found with a really thin shell, they would perform really well with the Rerings, where the head contacts the drum shell is really, really important, and those Rerings help stabilize it with the 6-ply. And I wanted to see what an 8-ply would do, and to see if that needed Rerings, and it doesn't. So I did a different bearing edge too. I did a double 45, so that the contact point was on the center of the drum head, a la Spawn. Back in the day, before I even started making drums, I had a couple of sets of Spawn drums, and I thought that was a really unique approach. From a manufacturing standpoint, it's pretty simple. You have one setup and you just go. And then it's also really easy to flatten out. But I did like the sound of the drums a lot, very easy to tune. I wanted to see what it would do with this kit, and it performs exceptionally well. I'm getting very, very nice tuning range. I'm getting really punchy, warm sounds, much different than the 6-ply.
Really?
Yeah, surprisingly. Now it is it's just a standard G2 on here. G1 bottom, G2 top, wide open, a lot of sound. I really like it, much better than I thought I would. I mean, I think the one thing people need to understand about the different species that we offer is that, yes, they all sound different. When you get into certain types, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, I apologize, but...
Go for it. I've got all these questions already ready, but go for it.
Yeah, but like ash and maple and birch, okay, they're pretty close in hardness. The one thing that sets them apart is the grain and the porosity and the openness. So when you do a recording of it under microphones and whatnot, they're pretty. It's sometimes very hard to discern, the difference. The extremes you get are with cherry and walnut and mahogany. You've got the softer woods and you've got the much harder woods. Jatoba and Bubinga are much, much harder. So now you've got much different overtones and high-end overtones with the harder woods and the low-end overtones and whatnot with the sweet woods. So the tuning range is going to be different. And I think that's the biggest thing I would like to say to people is that when you're looking for different species of wood, get one. If you're looking for versatility, try to choose the one that has the broadest spectrum of tuning ability.
What would be your number one choice?
See, that's where I have a really hard time. I have top 3 right now, and it's probably gonna freak you out. They're all tie. I'm building myself a kit this year. I have not had my own drum kit. I always just play the floor model. I'm very lucky that way. But it would either be yellow birch, ash, or oak.
Yellow birch, ash, or oak. Okay. What is yellow birch?
Yellow birch is much harder than the standard birch you get in your typical drum set. without naming any brands, it's much harder. The white birch you would find in, say, a Keller birch shell is in the 900 range, which is the same as cherry and the same as genuine mahogany. Now, yellow birch is about, I think it's 1320, and if I don't know if you recall, the Janka scale measures wood hardness, and as a barometer, maple is 1450. It's not the hardest in the domestic species, but it's up there. Okay, I think the hardest domestic species is hickory, which is pretty hard. And this is a scale we use to measure wood hardness, poplar being way down the lower end, but as we all know, poplar kind of gives a great sound. It works, especially in snare drums and bass drums and whatnot. And you can mix it with maple really well, which is something else we'll talk about. Now, the yellow birch is 1320, ash is in the same range. I'm sorry, yellow birch is 1260, ash is 1320, and oak is in the 1200 range. So they're all pretty close, right? The difference being, again, in the grain. Birch is very close grain. It's very nice to finish. You can get a gloss on it really well. You don't have to use any grain filler. Ash is a blend. It has sections that are smooth, but then the grain is real wide and open. Oak is just generally pretty porous. It's also not as pretty. It's kind of pink when you put color on it. It gets honey colored, pinkish when you put whites on it. And so you have to be careful what colors you put on it if you put anything on it. We've been using that in the new Relic series. I use the same shells from the Prime series in the Relic series. So those three woods are my number one. The oak being a little bit punchier, a little bit drier. The ash kind of takes on the presence of maple a little bit, but a little bit more attack. And the birch has just got some thunder. It's just got some meat to it. Pretty versatile, but I personally just really like it.
Are those differences strictly because of the porosity, the grain?
Pretty much, they're different woods completely, the composition, but yeah, a lot of it's the wood and the hardness, and the thing is that people don't understand, like, I could take, every tree is different. It's just like every drummer is different. You can get behind the kit and you'll make it sound one way, and I'll get behind the kit and I'll make it sound bad, but another way, So, but seriously, that's, and each tree will vary. Like white oak and red oak are very, very closely related, but generally speaking, white oak is harder than red oak. And a lot of people don't know that. So it does affect the sound. And then, of course, the most important part being the contact point to the drum head, that bearing edge. How much shell are you contacting? Where is it contacting the shell? Is it in the inside, the outside, the middle? How thick is that contact point? There are a lot of variables. Do you have a 45 relief on the outside? Do you have no relief? Is it straight up and down? Do you have a round over relief on the outside? So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I love all three. They all offer different pleasing sonic properties.
Do you have a species that you just don't personally like?
No, I like them all. Like, I like the cherry a lot because it's beautiful to work with. It had a narrow tuning range, and that was why I wanted to try this 8-ply. Now I'm in love with it. So it's kind of, again, once you take that little next step to, try something different, because without the Rerings, it stays open and full. It's got a lot of smack and attack, but it's super warm and super punchy. It's a great recorder. If anybody was looking for a studio kit right now, I would offer them cherry in the 8-ply or maybe ash in the 6-ply.
Cool.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a customer who wants something that is wrong and you tell them maybe that's the wrong choice for you? I
try. When it comes right down to it, the customer's right. People get a mindset, they really want something and they got to have it. If it's beyond my ability, which it might be a finish option or something crazy, it rarely happens, but if it does, I'm like, I just don't do that. I had a customer come to me and said, I want you to build me a kit that sounds exactly like this brand kit. I'm like, well, then go buy that brand kit. Well, I really want your brand. Well, if you buy my brand, then you're going to get my sound.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I'm not trying to be offensive. It's just that if you want that sound, then go buy that sound.
Yeah.
And as well as I do with proper tuning and drum heads and whatnot, you can you could get drums to sound the way you want to get them to sound.
Yeah.
It comes down to the flexibility and the tuning range. Yeah, I think guys and girls are looking for versatility. They're looking for drums that will do an upper register when they want it, a mid, and a lower. Some will only do high and low. Some will only do mid. Mm-hmm. So you have to be selective. And that's where I can help them out. And that's what the new website's going to do, too. We're going to be having sound samples of each and every species on there. Like walnut. How do you like your new walnut kit?
Well, that's a perfect example. Walnut and mahogany, I think, are two species that everyone thinks they want, but when you really start using them, they're quite specialized. They're quite
exactly.
They have their thing that you can. They only do their thing. Like walnut.
Exactly.
Walnut to me is very dark but contemporary.
Yep.
And mahogany is just very woolly, and you can never get it to be sounding modern. It just won't.
Yep. And it depends on the mahogany too. You know, the African mahogany, which is more abundant, is harder than is genuine mahogany. If I had my choice, I would work with genuine mahogany all the time. But I can't get it in plies. I have to make it myself. And that's a whole other process. Right now, I'm buying the veneers and making the shell out of the veneers, which is a little bit more straightforward. But you're right. So I find mahogany to be pretty, it likes low and warm, and it's got that vibe, and walnut, you can tune that high. You can get a nice jazz sound out of it, and you can kind of tune it low. They like the thunder. They like the big drums. The bass drums and floor toms, especially walnut and mahogany, they really like that. But when you start getting into mahogany and the smaller drums, sometimes you get a pitch bend. Maybe you don't want a pitch bend. And my maple drums, I'm getting so much sound out of my maple drums. It's unbelievable. The 6-ply, I'm thinking I'm going to have to kick them up to 8-ply like I did the cherry. They're just so warm and so big. It's like, wow, you know, it's almost too much sound.
Yeah, there's a reason why it's popular, right?
Yeah, it works, you know. But you look at the most popular species, your maples, your birches, and your oaks and your ashes, they're all in the middle, what I would call the middle hardness range. And that's what we're all used to. That's what we grew up with.
Well, my first question you already answered, but I'm going to ask it again anyway.
Sure.
What is the most important component of a drum?
Ooh. You know, I would really have to say, you know, the shell's got to be good. Because if the shell is good, then even if the bearing edge is kind of crappy, you can make it sound good.
And what do you mean by good?
It has to be solid. It has to be resonant. It has to produce a sound on its own. A lot of shells out there don't do that. So, like, if you hold it up and I do this thing, I'm going to reach over here. I'm going to grab this shell. This is going to a young lady down in Texas. But this shell has a tone. It's resonating, and I'm getting that to vibrate. And so that means when you hit this drum, that shell's going to participate in the sound. Okay, if you hit a shell and you're getting that, then the drum heads are doing a lot of the work. So if you take a shell that's resonant and is participating in the sound, and the contact point or the bearing edge is so, then you could do things to make that work. You can put some moon gel on it. You can tweak it. We're never getting perfectly tensioned all the time anyway. We try. We do our best. We come as close as possible. But I think, to me, and right behind it, a close second, of course, is the bearing edge, the contact point. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's attraction. That's where you're digging in. Once you seat that drum head, you know. So, and some people, I could answer that question in two ways. I could have said, the bearing edge is the most important component. The shell can be so. It can be okay, and as long as that bearing edge is perfect, then it's really a tie for me. Those are the two most critical parts: a good bearing edge coupled with a good shell.
Sweet. Is it worth trying to fix a cracked shell, or does that kind of ruin the integrity of it? Yeah,
I wouldn't bother.
Okay. If
they're plies that are separated, you don't know how deep those plies go. No, I've tried. It depends on the value of the drum. If the drum has no value, then get a new shell. If it's got value, send it out to an expert. I'm not that guy. It's a completely different process. I know drummer stores, that's all they do. It's very tedious. Joe Meckler, who runs the Delaware Drum Show, he's exceptional at that. There are other people out there that do the same thing. But I don't think so.
So that would lead me to think that acrylic and fiberglass and maybe even steel, those shells are kind of not contributing in any way to the sound. Would you agree?
What do you mean?
Well, they're not resonating. I mean, a plastic
shell...
no,
that's not true. That's not true. A lot of those do resonate. I can take a steel shell and I can hold it up and tap it and they resonate. Fiberglass too. They just resonate at different frequencies at different rates, just like different wood species do. Some do, some don't. It depends on what sound you're looking for. I'm always going for the most sound, because you can always take a drum and you bring it from up here down here, but you can't take a drum that isn't willing to produce up here and get it there without some kind of EQ, without adding some electronics to it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even hoops. I mean, take hoops, which is something you could take a standard 2.3 stamped hoop, and I can hold that up and I can tap it, and that will resonate. It will sing. So that means that hoop is going to move with the shell. It's going to be more open sounding. You can take a die-cast tube, which does the complete opposite, is dead. And when do we use die-cast tubes? Usually when we tone a drum down a little bit, especially on snare drums. So no, all your steel, all your chrome over steel, all your chrome over brass shells, they resonate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about even with like bass drums and toms?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, same idea with bass drum mount. The whole idea of keeping a bass drum virgin when you put the mount on there. Now I'm really happy to say that our bass drums don't suffer from that as much as I thought they would. So when a customer absolutely has to have a bass drum mount, they still really sound great. But you will get, again, the maximum sound by not compressing that shell. And wood hoops, and a perfect example of this was when I was a kid. My first real good drum set was a Tama Imperial Star. I got that when I was 16. And it was a concert tom set. They were really all the rage then. And it was a beautiful mahogany bass drum, 16 by 22, but it had metal hoops on it.
Right.
Okay. And so I just never, with a bass drum mount and those metal hoops, I never got the sound out of that drum that I thought I knew I could get. And then somebody said, hey, try some wooden hoops on that bass drum. And I was like, oh my goodness. You know what? It was like I just found a new bass drum, and it completely changed the sound of that bass drum. And I think that's something that, you and I have talked about, you've talked about with other people, how important the hoop selection with the shell.
Yeah, but not bass drum hoops. Nobody talks about that. That's probably why all those entry-level kits just sound dead on the low end.
Absolutely. Yeah. Metal is easy, finishing them. When I first built my first drum set, I bought metal hoops just to try them out because I didn't know much about making wooden hoops. So I'm like, well, let's see what happens with this. And they sounded okay. But then as soon as I put wood hoops on, it was night and day. It's you again, what you do is you increase that tuning range, the frequency response of the drum. And those mics are only going to pick up if you're using it under a mic situation. Human ears, my ears are shot, so I rely on the microphones to do it for me. So, that mic is going to pick up what that drum's going to do.
That makes me want to find my old export bass drum and see what it sounds like without those heavy metal hoops on it.
Those shells are great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, seriously, that if you're looking for a cheap gigging kit, whatever, Keith up at Pocket Percussion, he has a lot of those drums, and he's been doing really well with the used kits. And I'll do some work for him once in a while. He'll bring me something to recut or finish or whatever. And, it's a great spot, a great way to test out that theory. Get a cheap bass drum, throw some wooden hoops on it, see what it does.
Wild. All right, so let's shift into shell types, because I know you've gone... When I first met you, you were messing around with block shells, and then you were doing a hybrid, which you called semi-solid, so it had a solid core and plywood inner and outer, I believe. And now you're making your own ply shells. So let's talk about the three types and why you've now gone to making your own plywood shells.
Well, any block shells I did, they were experimental. I never did them for an extended period of time. I did a few snare drums like that, but that was all a precursor to doing the semi-solid. It was really important to me, with all the drum companies out there, to be able to make my own shells. And I thought, well, how can I do this? I'm a woodworker. I'm a cabinet maker by trade for 30-some years. So I thought, well, if I could take it seemed logical. If I could take a solid wood drums on their own are somewhat susceptible to changes in environment. I think they really excel in studios. They sound great. They have an unbelievable sound. And then of course there's different kinds. You've got steam bent, and then you've got stab, you've got segment, you've got all these different variations now, and some much stronger than others, some much more stable than others. But all in all, they're much more susceptible to changes. So if you've got a gigging kit, gig where you're gigging all the time and you're playing outside, you're playing inside in arenas, a solid wood drum isn't always going to do what you need it to do. And besides that, if I'm going to have a solid wood drum, I wouldn't risk any damage to that, in a gigging situation. So I thought, well, if I could stabilize a solid wood drum, how would I do that? So I thought, well, if I was to insert it inside of a ply drum, then what would that give me? And I spent a couple of years working on that combination, decreasing the section of the ply shell to the thinnest possible, and increasing and actually decreasing the inner shell. And I found that a 50-50 combo worked best. So 50% solid wood, 50% ply. And then I would insert a Rering, and when I cut the bearing edge, I would round over the outside and cut the inside. So the drum head only sat on the solid wood portion. So what you were hearing was primarily the solid wood. Perfect example is your Bop kit and your Mahogany kit. That Mahogany kit sounds like a Mahogany kit. But what you've got is a much more woody sound. It's a much more compressed sound and a much more mic-friendly sound. You can play those things wide open without any. They're very easy to tune, and they really, really sound great. It's a thicker sound that carries into the audience very, very well. However, the drawback to the design is it's very time-consuming to make. It's expensive and time-consuming. When I moved into this shop here, it's been serving me very well, but I'm quickly outgrowing it. So what I found was that in order to be competitive in my pricing, which I'm always try to work with people on, I have standard pricing, but I try to be competitive too. So it was just taking me an enormous amount of time. It's taking me, say, 10 days to make a set of shells. It's too long. And then I have to worry about the finishing process and whatnot. So while they sound great, while they function very well from a business standpoint, I needed something else. And so I said, I need to make a ply shell that can perform as well as this semi-solid. Something I can turn around faster, still has excellent quality, is made very well, but is going to give me that sound. And so I spent about 3 years working on that. I designed and built my own molds. And this mold design it's exceeded all my expectations. The sound that I'm getting out front is very, very close to that semi-solid. It's a very woody, very full sound. And I say out front because that's the most important part. That's the audience's perspective. That's what they're hearing. That's what's going along with the music. And so behind the kit, I want it to sound great too. And we all know if it sounds good out front, it's probably going to sound pretty good out back too. So this is a concept I can turn around a set of shells in 24 hours as opposed to 10 days.
Right.
So, and much more accurately. Now, the beautiful thing is I will be working on the semi-solids in the future again. When I have a little bit more space, I'm going to be building another set of molds, hopefully 2 sets of molds. And with these new molds, I'll be able to increase the production of the semi-solids. So I will be able to incorporate them instead of maybe 5 days instead of 10 days. So I'll still be able to do them. I still want to do them, but for right now, I'm getting, I feel, 98%, 99% of the same sound that I am with these new ply shells. And the other thing is that these new ply shells are a lot lighter. And I think that's important.
Yeah, the semi-solids are pretty beefy shells.
Yeah, you've got a ply shell and a solid wood component laminated to it, then you got the finish, and you got a heavy drum. So
how... They definitely sound different. So what is it that makes your plywood shells different than a Keller shell off the rack?
I think they have a woodier sound. They're more open. They have a woodier sound. It's a cold press process instead of a heated process. I think when you heat treat or add heat, you're adding moisture or drying something out, or you're changing the overall composition of the shell to some degree. And so that's going to give you a different sound. All my tests have been that I feel like the sounds that my shells are producing are just, I think, more desirable. I was trying to achieve that semi-solid sound. How can I get a woody sound, something that sounds more pleasing to the ears, both to the audience and on our microphones? Because as well as I do, his microphones don't lie. Mm-hmm. They are little microscopes, sonic microscopes. And so, they're going to tell you what that drum is doing. And if you've done a good job tuning it, it's going to let you know immediately. Mm-hmm. So
your Prime series focuses on one species and maximizing the tone, the natural tone of that species.
Correct.
What would be, on the flip side, the optimal blends of species, in your opinion?
That's something I just started messing with this year. Mm-hmm. And we all know there's standards, but I started messing with maple mahogany, mm-hmm. and I started messing with maple poplar. Mm-hmm. And they're pretty standard, but the combination where you place those blends is important.
Really? How so?
Well, having like an inner of mahogany with an outer of maple is going to give you more mahogany sound, and then vice versa. Makes sense, right? Yep. We all know the internal chamber of the drum is what creates the sound. So, but recently I've done a couple snare drums in 10-ply format where we got 2 plies of maple, 6 plies of mahogany, and 2 plies of maple. And they have a really interesting vintage vibe to them. They have a really woody sound. Almost flat, but in a good way, because they have a smack, like a compressed sound. I've tried them with different hoop combinations, and I really like them. So that's something that I'm going to experiment more with in kits as well. I've done some ash and birch bass drums, which are exceptionally punchy bass drum. These are nice blends. But if you realize the ash and the birch are similar in hardness, where they have different grain setups, different, closed and open grain, they worked well together. So people need to realize when they come to me with a strange request, which sometimes it happens, I want to combine this, I want to combine that. I did a kit also that was maple 6-ply with 2 plies of walnut inside. And that gave a very cool sound. We did a full contact round over edge, and it was somewhat very open, but a little bit vintage. Had a lot of sound, but very, very, very pleasing.
Are there blends to avoid? Like, would you not do an oak and a mahogany or something like that?
I just made some like that for somebody. Yeah. Or I'm sorry, it was oak and cherry. See, what's really funny is that cherry on the scale is 950. It's a really wonderful wood to work with, really stable. But it's also the same hardness as genuine mahogany. And if you were to put those under a microphone, they do sound pretty close in the sweetness of them, but the cherry is going to be brighter. So that has to do with a lot with that closed grain. It's not that they wouldn't work. It's, again, you're going to have to experiment with where you place them and what ratios. Like I would probably, if I was going to build oak or mahogany and a 6-ply, let's say, I would do 2 plies of oak, 2 plies of mahogany, 2 plies of oak, and then put a reinforcement ring. If I did 8-ply, I would do 4-ply in the middle. Just because that warmth is going to come from the middle of the shell and give me that sweetness, and then the oak is going to brighten it up a little bit. A lot of what I do is just on a hunch. You just get a gut feeling about things. I've been doing this for so long, you just kind of get a hankering. You're like, I think that would work pretty well. And I can't explain to anybody why or how. It's just like when a drummer lays down this thing. Look at Gad. I mean, he comes up with something, whatever it is, and there it is, and you're like, wow. And it's not always wow, but but most of the time it is. Like this cherry kit's a perfect example. Like I knew right away what kind of bearing edges I wanted to put on it, and I had a really strong feeling it would work, and it gave me exactly what I wanted. So,
how does shell depth come into the play of the sound?
It's important. How quickly those heads react to each other is really important, especially in bass drums. I've found lately that I'm really digging my 12x9 toms over a 12x8. I like a 12x8. I just get a little something extra out of a 12x9. It's just my ear, though, and the feel of the drum.
What about floor toms? Do you avoid square sizes?
If I can. I feel like even 1 inch off will make an enormous difference in the tuning of that drum. All our floor toms are like 15x16, 13x14. It's just, you don't need a square drum. In fact, I like a 14 by 16. The closer those are together, again, they're going to react with each other much faster. So that means those heads can be a little bit looser if you're looking for a fatter or deeper sound. Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
What's your favorite bass drum depth?
I like a 14 by 24. And in a 20, I do all the sizes in the Prime series, and all the series is picked for a reason. 16 by 20, 15 by 22, 14 by 24.
Oh, interesting. So you scale the depth back as the diameter increases.
Yeah. I'm a little OCD that way. I just think it's cool, but it works. When I first started making drums, it was this really cool thing to have like this 20-inch deep bass drum.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And they felt pretty cool. But when I was on stage and I'm playing, I couldn't hear myself. All the sound was going out this ginormous tube at the end. I'm beating the snot out of the drum to hear myself, right? And so, and I was actually tuning the heads tighter to get them to react to each other because they were further away from each other. So I wasn't necessarily getting a deeper sound. And so we saw the subwoofers come in, where we were in these woofers attached to the end of these long bass drums to pick up the low end. It's kind of cool, and I think for studio use, those woofers are great. But you really don't need a giant, long, deep bass drum anymore. If it's a feel thing, you can achieve that by putting more pillows on the bass drum, kind of deadening that head a little bit. But a 14 by 24, our 14 by 24s I put up against anything. They sound like a house. Your Mahogany kit's 14 by 24.
Yeah, it's a great sound. It's classic.
Yeah,
it's classic,
and it feels good. And that's another thing that's important.
All right, let's talk about bearing edges.
Okay.
How does the angle or the roundness affect the sound?
Well, the more shell contact you have when you round over, I have two roundovers. On the Prime series, I do a very slight roundover, and it's a 3/4 inch to 1 inch curvature, radius curvature, and I feel that's really important because then the drum head fits much more naturally. Not so much Remo, because Remo has a very angled, but other companies fits much more naturally. You get less slap and less play, so that avoids any gaps out there between that, and it also creates more shell contact, and it also pushes the contact point of the bearing edge over to the more flat part of the head, which is really kind of easier to tune. So the more shell contact, the more roundover, the more wood, more shell you're getting involved in the sound, but you're also going to decrease the resonance or the sustain a little bit, which is not a bad thing. You don't want it to go on forever. So I also have another edge, like on your walnut kit. It's a very tight radius. It's a 1/4 inch. And I was going for maximum shell contact with that. So it was a very tight radius, went over to 3/4 of the ply, and then cut back 45. The reason we start doing the 45 or the 33 cutback is that when those drums are tuned loose, they would literally flap down and hit the inside of the bearing edge and create a buzz. So that's why we got away from that. You had to tune the drums tighter than you really wanted to in order to get them to stop doing that buzz or that slapback. So that's why we started doing the 45 years ago. At least that's my take on it. That's why I do it. I do a full roundover, a baseball bat, full contact. Kevin Safara's Oak kit has that. That was something he requested specifically, and that kit sounds amazing. It's very rich. You have a ton of shell contact with just the right amount of sustain. So
which ones buzz? If they're rounded on the inside, that'll buzz.
Yeah, I mean, not always. It just depends on the tuning. But you definitely don't want to. When that head is tuned loose, you can see it in your mind's eye. If you've got this contact point, it's the potential for the head to come down and hit the inside of that edge is there. And it's also a very dead sound. It's a much deader sound than you would get when you do a relief cut on the inside. You're going to get a much more lively sound. Some people do a very thin contact point, and you'll do that on certain species. The harder the wood, the less contact. Like if I was to take a Jatoba drum, being Brazilian cherry, which is one of our cool exotics we go to, it's actually much harder than Bubinga, but it gives a similar tone. Sounds amazing. Big bass drum, very warm, big sound. If I do a lot of shell contact, that's going to choke that drum out. So that's a species I'm going to do a much thinner contact point to.
All right, let's talk about Rerings. Why use them, and what do they do to the sound?
Well, they stabilize the drum. In toms and bass drums, they stabilize the sound. They make them easier to tune. Again, perfect example is our 6-ply. I originally started doing 6-ply without Rerings. But the drums were resonating so much where they contacted the head, they were vibrating. They made them difficult to tune. So by adding that Rering, it cuts down the vibration at the contact point and then stabilizes that drum. It also brings the tuning range up a little bit. Same idea in snare drums. In snare drums you can get a lot more pop, and you stabilize the drum. And the softer woods need that. Not all, but some.
Is there ever a time when you would just put a Rering on top or something like that?
I've done that. Special request.
Do anything significant?
Nah, not really. It changes the feel up top. It's more of a feel thing, and it allows the bottom to open up a little bit. I did that for an artist recently, Richie DiCarlo. He saw Peter Erskine's drum, and the snare drum that he had made. He said, "Hey, can we do that?" And we tried it with a maple and ash combo, and it sounded really neat. It gave it a little bit more. It was a blend, a little bit more open. It might give you a little bit more sensitivity on the snare, on the bottom, but for the most part, they affect the feel a lot more than you think. I mean, this is all my take.
Yeah, well,
there are no rules. Everybody's got their own take, and there's gonna be people out there that disagree with me 100%, and that's fine. But I think a Rering on top and the bottom of the snare, the human ear is not gonna hear it.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Let's talk about hardware.
Sure.
Not hoops yet, but like lugs and placement of lugs. How much does that weigh into the overall sound?
Well, it's important. But first of all, I want to congratulate you on your new gig. And I'm really happy for you because it's a great company. And the one thing I wanted to say is that the offering that they have is tremendous. We don't manufacture all the metal components here. Nobody does. And I think most people know that. It's just not possible, and it's way too expensive to manufacture everything. Some people do. But the selection they have, and even over the past year and a half, things have been difficult for everybody. And the stock is always excellent, and the shipping is fast, and the customer service is awesome. I mean, these are really, as a business owners, these are really crucial things. They're very, very important to keep things moving along. So, yeah, and we are standardizing a lot of things. We have standard options, and that's why I've created these new product lines. We've got the Prime, the Relic, and the Regal, which we can talk about if you want later. But to answer your question, I think, the lugs are very important. The quality of the lug is really, really critical first. It has to function. And the placement. Single point lugs, as we know, it's a minimal contact. It gives a more open sound. You're going to maximize the resonance of that drum. When you have long tube lugs, you're connecting the drum. It's still single point, but now you're connecting the drum with a rod from top to bottom. So if that's not installed properly, or there's tension on it, you can actually choke the shell. It's like rims mounts. Rims mounts really work really well to suspension mount. But if you have that pinching the tension rods a little bit, you're going to choke the drum. Sometimes they work against you. So it's anything quality. It has to move with the drum. It has to let the shell do its job. It's like a properly wrapped drum. We glue all our wraps on. That's really, really important. And then we compress it. So when you take that shell out of the wrap roller and you hit it, it still resonates. It goes back to the premise I talked about earlier. Some people wrap a drum, but they don't compress that glue. One, it's not bonding to the shell. And two, it's blanketing the shell and it's deadening the sound. Especially if you have a glass glitter. And I don't know if people are aware of this, but glass glitter is actually the thickest, heaviest wrap there is. And if it's not installed properly, it will kill the sound.
I had someone ask me recently what they should do for finish. I was like, are you going to take it out of your house? Like, if you are, just get a wrap because you're not going to worry about it, and it's still going to sound great.
Yeah.
I think people get scared of wraps, but if it's, like you said, if they're put on properly, the drum still sings. There's no question.
In fact, I've made a few ash kits that I wrapped, and they sounded phenomenal. It took a little bit of that top end off, and that's about the only sonic difference you'll hear is you will lose a little top end. If it's installed properly, you're going to get all the same sound, boom, big, bada boom.
So what about like die-cast lugs versus tube lugs? You use both, so what would you?
Yeah, not a huge sound difference. You know, the only thing is if it's a die-cast lug with a spring in it, you just got to make sure that that's insulated properly, doesn't rattle. You know, but I'm not really finding a huge difference in sound.
So, okay, now let's go into hoops. Because I know we've talked a lot about hoops over the years.
Sure.
Just go from no flange up to single flange, triple flange, die cast. When do you decide what to pick?
Well, you know, I standardize everything. Everything's standard 2.3, and the reason being is it works.
Yeah.
They resonate with the shell. They're strong. They look great. They work. And the only time I make any difference is if I'm like our Relic series comes with a single flange. We're going for a vintage vibe here. We want these drums look old. They function like an older drum. However, everything on the drum is new. And you know, the 2.3, like I think your Mahogany kit originally had single flange hoops on it.
Yes.
If you recall.
Yep.
And that thing was like a house, man. It had so much sound.
Much sound.
You know, and I love that. If I'm out gigging and I'm not mic'd up, that's what I want, man.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to hear me, you know, whether you want to or not, you know, so, and that's kind of it. So that's the maximum sound. And then I think we ended up putting 3.0s on, and that took the sound down here. It narrowed the tuning range, but then now it's more controllable sound, especially under the mics.
Yeah.
And so a 2.3 with single flange clips, it gives a look. They're all brass, by the way. 99% of what they're off, they're made really well to brass. So with our Relic series, when we treat these, they end up being this beautiful brass patina and the clips and then the lugs, and you've got this really cool vibe going on. Up from that, now the same look but a different sound completely is the no flange. They're steel and they're 4.5, so they're much thicker. And I would have to say they're right in between like a 2.3 and a die-cast. They still really let the drum open up a lot because you got the whole clip assembly and you got a more open sound, but it's more focused. And it's not as severe as a 3.0. It's like your walnut kit is another example because I think those drums, they really sing. They have a lot of sound, but it's a very controlled sound. And then we got diecast, and I generally don't use diecast much. We will be offering diecast on our Regal series as the standard hoop option. So the Regal series is going to be the creme de la creme. It's going to be the real high-end 8-ply shell configuration, and it's going to be exotic veneers with diecast hoops.
Yeah, I don't use diecast on anything but a few snare drums. I feel like they work on snare drums, but toms, I haven't really found a spot for them in my palette.
Yeah, it's definitely an acquired taste, but these kits are meant to be expensive, and everything on all the options are going to be expensive options. And I think the 8-ply coupled with a double 45, I think they're going to sound great.
Oh, I should mention, you talked about brass hoops. You're not talking about brass plated steel. You're talking about solid brass.
Yeah, exactly.
Chromed or clear coated. There's a huge difference. I had that discussion recently. Someone bought brass plated hoops.
A major difference in the sound. I mean, steel is steel.
Yeah.
It's a different sound. Brass sounds amazing. You know, that's the combination. They're a 2. Maybe they're 2.5. They're either 2.5 or 2.3. There are two versions. And in the brass single flange, that's just a really beautiful sound. You know, if you've got a drum that's suffering from not enough sound, those are the kind of hoops you can put on there or open it up and give it more sound.
Yeah, I don't think everyone knows, but the old Slingerland stick savers are brass. They're chrome over brass. Most of them are, at least. Yeah.
Well, and it's just like snare drums. Everybody thinks you have a chrome snare drum that's going to sound wonderful. Well, is it chrome over steel or is it chrome over brass?
Yeah.
You know, there's a difference.
Or aluminum. Yeah, it could be anything.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's talk about drum heads.
Okay.
How do you decide on what heads to put on a kit that you just built?
Well, you got to have a starting point, and I pretty much use a single ply top and bottom. Again, that's going to maximize the sound. We work with Evans primarily. For no other reason that they're just a great company to deal with. They're local to me, and I get heads pretty quickly. And I get a lot of people. Most of my customers ask for Evans. So it's just a no-brainer. But again, I think they have, we use a G1 top and G1 clear on the toms, G1 on the snare, 300 weight on the bottom. I like an EQ3 bass drum batter or an EMAD bass drum batter. I think their heads, especially in bass drums, they excel. Other companies make really good drum heads too. I mean, and I've tried them all, and they all sound really good, but with different results. But again, I'm going for, I want somebody to get these drums, and when they pick them up or I ship them to them and they start playing them and they go, these sound amazing, and these are only G1s. And you can imagine what I could do if I tried some other things. And so that's just the starting point. To me, that's it. When you did the very first review on that Bop kit, it arrived with clear G1s top and bottom, because I wanted you to know that those drums would perform that well with just the very basic drum head, and they did.
Is there like a drum head shell combination that is just really sweet that you might recommend? Like, is there a mahogany head choice that you would go with? Is there a walnut head choice that might not be your standard G1 or G2?
Yeah, the G12s are great. Even Remo makes their version called the Ambassador X. So these are 12 mil versions, and I've been using those with a lot of success too on some of these naughty shells, the drums with a lot of sound that are hard to control. G1s sometimes get a little floppy on the bottom and they distort a little under heavy playing, but a G12 will help eliminate that. Now, we'll give you sometimes more sustain up top, but it's not a bad thing. They're also really durable. You get the durability of a 2-ply and the sound of a 1-ply response. And they give a snare drum a lot of snot, a lot of pop. They just really crack. And it's a much different sound than a G1, because you can tune it tighter before it'll start to stretch. So that's another head combo I like to use, either G1 over G1 or G12 over G12, G12 over G1. They all work great. And then, of course, the G2 clear up top. That's what's on this kit right now. G2 clear over G1. Again, depends on what I want. But those are the standard. That's what they come with.
Let's talk about snare drums. So if I called you and said, I want to buy 3 snare drums. I want you to build me 3 snare drums, and I want them to cover the widest range possible.
Wow.
What would be the 3 sizes and makes that you would suggest?
Well, I would build you would be a Mach 1. Okay. Probably it's an 8-ply maple, and they're available in 7, 8, and 9 inch depth. You can get them in 12, 18, and 24 ply. And see, when we make our shells, we layer them up little by little. We're not taking 2 10-ply shells and smashing them together and glue them together to get a 20-ply or a 30-ply. We're taking each ply. So believe it or not, these 24-ply shells, when I pick them up, I hold them, I tap test them, they have a sound, they resonate. It's a higher pitch, but they resonate. And they play a huge role in the sound. That's extremely sensitive, ballsy, woody drum. You have one, I think. It's a combo. You have a what I would call special edition. It's a 12-ply maple poplar. So that's got a little bit more vintage flavor with that poplar in the middle, but that drum smacks. It's a really good sounding drum. And so that would be one. The other would be oak. The oak 6-ply snare drum is extremely versatile. You can tune it up for jazz, and you can tune it up for anything. It's just got a really nice focused sound, not too much sound, very controllable. It's almost the perfect snare. It's just in a wood snare drum. And the other one I'm really liking is the Ash 8-ply, no Rerings. It's also a really nice sounding drum. Again, it's got this bite to it that the oak doesn't have. So it's a drum that you can get much different sounds and tuning range out of it than the oak. So, and the Mach 1, by the way, is 100% maple. So that's a 100% maple premium drum. It comes in satin black or satin natural finish.
What would be the dimensions? So you said 7 by 14 for the Mach 1?
Yeah, I would do a 7 by 14, and in the oak drum, I would probably do a 5.5 by 14, and then a 6 by 14 in the Ash.
There you go.
And that half inch really makes a big difference, and most of it has to do with the feel, But again, the tuning range, but the feel is also really. I like a deeper drum, and not that it really matters anymore because I'm not out there gigging. But when I play, I want to be comfortable, and so when I play a 6.5 or 7 by 14, it has strictly to do with the feel, because I can tune that sucker up and get a pop out of it if I want to. And I like a medium range. I like a punchy snare drum.
What was the first snare drum you ever built?
It was maple. It was an 8-ply maple. My first 2005 is when I first started messing with drums, building them. I had my cabinet business. I was doing that full time, and I had started playing drums again after about 8 years off, which is that was kind of typical for me. I had a lot of things I wanted to learn, so I would break away from drumming and learn other things and do that. So I thought, I started jamming again, and after purchasing several drum kits, I was just not satisfied with the amount of time I was spending and the sounds I was getting. I'm like, look, you've had particular ideas your whole life. Why don't you see if you can achieve those on your own? So I did what everybody does. I bought some Keller shells. These were the traditional maple Keller shells, and I started making my own drums. I made a kit, and it was, I tried extremes. I did the 24 by 24 bass drum, a 14 by 14, and a 10 by 10, just because I could, and I hadn't seen this before, so I tried it, and I was really happy with it. And I know the guy that still owns that kit.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, and so he added on to it and made it this really awesome kit. And then years later, he bought another kit, a Prime Series Ash maple kit. So anyway, the first snare drum was, I'm pretty sure, was a mahogany exterior with an 8-ply maple shell with brass tube lugs. And it was just a drum.
Has there been a drum that you've built that you didn't want to give away?
Every day. No, really, every day. Yeah, there's most of them. They're all really good. I mean, I'm always, knock on wood. I mean, it doesn't leave here until I know it's right. So sometimes I get special requests, and I'm like, I'm not sure about it, but I'll do it. If I'm not, if it goes against my better judgment, I talk them out of it. But if I'm cool with it, I'm like, yeah, if that'll work, then I'll do it. And sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised. All the ash drums that go out of here blow me away. It's something I'm really excited about. And again, it's just, I'm excited about this shell process. It's a home run for me. It's really working. And I think that's what is important. It has to work, and it's consistent. Yeah, I've got a kit I'm working on now. It's a big ash kit. No pun intended. Yeah, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 16, 22, 6-ply ash. So I do get the big kits. I don't know why. But they're a lot of work. And they have to be consistent with the finish and the glue-ups and everything. And they take up a lot of room. But, that's part of what I do. And that's going to be a really exciting kit. We did a backline kit, and I did that in ash for a local company, a big backline company. It was a 10, 12, 14, 16, 22, and a 5 by 14 ash snare. Really, really great sounding kit.
I don't know that I've ever played 100% ash kit. I don't know that I have. I've played a lot of maple with ash veneer that they say is ash.
Right.
But you learn quickly that's not the case.
Well, and there are a lot of companies out there that do this where they have an exotic veneer and then the shell's maple, and they call it like a black limba snare. And I'm sorry, no, it's a maple snare with black limba exterior. Yeah. It's a maple drum. Right. and you're paying $1,100, $1,200 for a drum like this, and they're beautiful drums. It's a great instrument, but you're not getting 100% exotic. If you order an exotic drum from me, you're going to get 100% exotic if that's what you want. I did that zebra wood kit a couple months ago. The customer brought me the material. He bought this stuff, Bakodi interiors, Bubinga core with a zebra wood bird's eye exterior.
Wild. What'd that sound like?
It sounded amazing. It really did. Bubinga's a beautiful wood. It makes for a really nice drum. And it was different, very different, very tonal, very melodic, a lot of sound.
All right, let's wrap it up. So, a reminder, 7x14, what was the Mach?
Mach 1. Mach and 1. I call it the Mach 1 because it sounds like it's breaking the sound barrier when you hit it. That's why, man. They sound great.
So that's your powerhouse, and then your more sensitive, jazzy sound would be the 5.5x14 oak.
Yep.
And then what does the ash do? If you do a 6x14 ash, that fills in what gap?
It gets really fat, but it also has a bite to it the oak doesn't. It's an upper register note. You know, it's got like a crack to it. And not that the oak won't do that, but it's just different. It's a harder wood.
All right, there you have it. Thank you so much for all the, we got right into it, so.
All right, man. No, it's a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. So, we'll talk to you soon.
You got it, dude.
That's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please drop a review over on iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. That really does help us spread the word. We want this show to be heard by every drummer possible. So please, if you don't mind, give us a 5-star rating, drop a review. Be much appreciated. And have a good week. We'll see you next week, same time. See ya.